recognize that your power, your greatness, you're the creator of all things. Thank you for the breath of life you have given us today. Be with us as we study your word this morning. With our classes downstairs, the teachers, the students, thank you for everyone who attends today. For whether they're willing to sacrifice their time and their lives to worship you, pray that we worship in spirit and in truth. But as a congregation, we will grow spiritually, grow in number, grow closer together, closer to you. Be with us this day. Amen. Turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 14. I know Daryl didn't quite get to chapter 14, so we'll just spend a few minutes on it if we can, if you don't mind. We have this woman called the woman of Tekoa in chapter 14. The woman of Tekoa. Here we have Absalom is not in Jerusalem, is he? He was exiled. For what? Exiled by David for killing his brother. Well, Joab, David's commander of his army, says he perceived that David's heart was drawn towards Absalom. Of course, being a father and a son, he's gonna be drawn towards his son. What's David's attitude towards Absalom right now? Not happy with him. I think it's a little of both, don't you? I think he is drawn to Absalom, wants to see Absalom, but at the same time, Absalom killed his other son. And that was Amnon. Why did he kill Amnon? For raping Absalom's sister, full sister. So Joab concocts this scheme. He wants David to bring Absalom back because, I don't know, he wants them to get together. Maybe he thinks that Absalom will be the next king. And how can he do that if he's in Geshur? So Joab concocts this scheme to somehow get Absalom back to Jerusalem. So he hires this woman, or I don't know if he hires her monetarily, but he gets her, he sends for her, he tells her to act like she was mourning, and then go to King David. And then he tells her what to say. He invents this story. The story which reminds me of what happened with David and Nathan. Perhaps Joab knows about that story. I would think he does, wouldn't you? He probably knows about the whole Nathan story. So he thinks he's going to be wise like Nathan and come up with this little parable that's going to just shock David into bringing Absalom back. So it's very similar to Nathan's story. God told Nathan to speak to David, though. Did God tell Joab to speak to David? No. So there's a difference here. And you see the difference on the outcomes, too. God told Nathan to go to David. The outcome was way different than this story will end up. God did not tell Joab to speak to David. In fact, Joab's plan will not end well for David long run. What story did she tell to David? Just briefly, what was the story? This woman of Tekoa, Joab concocted the story. And
she had two sons, one killed the other, and the avenger of blood, or the kin people, wanted the other son to stone him, to pay for, the avenger of blood. And she said if they stone him, then she will have no one, and the inheritance of the land and all that would then go out of her family into the next.
And her husband's already gone.
Yes.
So in order to keep her land and her heritage with her name, she's hoping to keep one of her sons alive. One son killed the other, so because of avenger of blood, the old law, they could technically kill the other son. So this is the story that she tells David. Boo-hoo, don't you feel sorry for me? What do you think I should do, David? Well, what is his reaction? Yeah. So David, being David, the way he the second son should live. You should protect the second son. He even said, I will do whatever to protect your other son. In other words, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. I'll handle it. Well, she wasn't done there. So he didn't get it at that point. He wasn't making the connection. But it wasn't a very good analogy. It just wasn't. It wasn't like what the story Nathan told was just like, David got it right away. He wasn't getting this. So she actually has to come out and be a little more direct. She said, you are guilty, and you have not allowed your son to return. So somehow he was supposed to get back based on her story. But he didn't get it.
But that's the beauty, though. That's the whole point of the Nathan principle, is that people don't see the application to themselves. They see and they are able to make judgments, on the situation and not be self-condemned. But then when you say you're the man, then all of a sudden, boom, it hits the right place.
Then it is right in the eye.
So this kind of thing, and of course this responsibility.
So, yeah. No, so you're right. She said, you are guilty. You have not allowed your son to return. And she has this long speech and everything. And she talked about water spilling on the ground. She tried to be real live. Joab, basically. It didn't work. In my opinion, it didn't work. So she had to come out and say it. You're guilty. So after she was done speaking, and I don't know what I liked about this is she went through this whole speech and the whole back of David's mind. He was thinking that this is Joab probably, and he didn't interrupt her. He let her finish speaking. I think that's a good principle for us. Because a lot of times when we're listening to someone else talk, if we have a thought, what do? We interrupt. That is so rude. That is not what we should do. That's not a good listener. That's not a good friend. Let's just not interrupt people. But David waited till she was finished, and then he spoke his mind. He goes, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to tell me the truth. Did Joab tell you to do this? So he knew what was up. But basically, at the end, he goes, okay, Joab, I'll agree with you. I'll let you bring Absalom back. So Joab got real excited. He went straight away to get her. He brought her back. But it was under a condition. What was that? What was the condition?
That he could not be in a king's life.
Yeah, he still didn't want to see him do it. So that tells me that David hadn't completely forgiven Absalom. Still didn't want to see him. Maybe he longed for him, but there's that part of him that has not forgiven Absalom yet. So he must go to his own house. So how long did it go between? He hasn't seen Absalom probably in a while. Absalom comes to Jerusalem. So how long is it going to be before David actually sees Absalom? 2 years. Well, Absalom's in town. I couldn't imagine one of my sons being in my town, going 2 years without seeing him. And I know that happens in families. Families fall out, and we see that happen a lot. Couldn't imagine doing that or not making amends with my children. It's kind of a special circumstance when one of your child kills another one of your children. Couldn't imagine that either. But this again was a result of what? Sin. This was a result of David's poor decision making. And that's always the back of his mind. You know it is. And we see that even in the stories to come. That guilt is always in the back of his mind. So now Absalom was in Jerusalem. Now he can start acting on his plot. Do you think he was plotting this while he was in Geshur?
Yeah.
And now, because that's maybe why he wanted to come back so bad? Yeah, perhaps. Or it could be that now that he's in Jerusalem, now he can start plotting. So think about that.
Yeah, it's hard to say when, of course.
Yeah.
The Bible doesn't tell us, but it makes me think of the prodigal son. He wants his inheritance before his father's dead. Now they have to put, Solomon in while David's still alive to
Yeah.
Pull people back together, you might say.
Unite people.
Yeah, you get some peace, but it's still the idea is that it's pretty disrespectful to try to get your inheritance before your parents are dead.
Yeah. Well, that's the least of it. I'm sure David would have been happy to give her money.
Right.
That's all he had asked for. Absalom. Expert politician? Yeah. Yeah. Nobody in Israel was as handsome as Absalom. Everyone praised him because he was so handsome. He had nothing wrong with him, from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. Once a year he would cut his hair because it was so heavy. It was about 5.5 pounds of hair every year. The guy was good looking. So there's no doubt about that. And whenever for the most part, whenever you see a politician, usually they're on the good looking side. Usually. There's a few exceptions. Maybe taller, good looking, people are drawn to him. Well, that was Absalom. And he knew it. He was going to use that to his advantage. He lived in Jerusalem for 2 years without seeing David. Twice while he was, during those 2 years, he had asked Joab, I want to go see my father. And Joab ignored him. How did he get Joab's attention?
He set his grain field on fire.
And Joab has a field that butts up next to his, Absalom's. And so he told his servant to go set Joab's on fire. Well, that'll get his attention. So sure enough, Joab comes knocking on my door. Why did you set my field on fire? Absalom, well, since you're here, I want to go see my father. So he kind of ignored the whole fire thing. He just started in on, I want to see my father. So it worked, got his attention. He told Joab this, I want you to ask my father why he brought me here. It's been 2 years. It would have been better for me to still be there in Geshur than to be here. I want to see the king. And if I have sinned in any way, let him kill me. Do you think Absalom believes that he sinned? No. He feels he was justified for what he did, for killing his brother. So the king agrees to see Absalom at this point. So Absalom comes in, he puts his face to the ground, he bows down, puts his face to the ground. It says that the king David went down to kiss him. Now is this a family reunion? Or is this more like a formal greeting? More formal, doesn't it? It's like something anyone would do. They would come and bow before the king. He might not kiss him. But I can see David maybe leaning down, kissing him on the back of the head or top of the head or something. It just doesn't seem like there's a lot of connection there right now. But that's what it says. The king reached down and kissed him. I see this more as a formal. It's not quite like how Joseph greeted his brothers. Remember that family reunion? They were crying. They were hugging. It was a joyous occasion.
Now, with the sons, I was curious what order Hammond was first.
Hammond.
That I saw. So he was the heir.
Right.
He was gone. And that, when I understood that, I thought, well, it makes more sense why I was so serious. But then, after Hammond is somebody, Daniel, who's Abigail's son. And he never mentioned anything. And Absalom's next.
Yeah.
So
It does make you think that maybe that was part of his motive for killing Amnon.
I think it's why he waited 2 years before he killed that. Yeah.
because he was the heir apparent, and now he's killing him, which makes him.
Yeah, makes it, and he knows that. So he was in Geshur. Now he's 2 years in Jerusalem before he sees his father. And what does he ask his father when he sees him? He asks him to go somewhere.
They want to go to sacrifice.
What town?
No.
Anybody know the town? Where was David first crowned king? Hebron. So there might be a reason that Absalom wants to go to Hebron. Absalom got a chariot, so now he's in Jerusalem. He got a chariot. He gets a chariot with 50 men that ran before him. So he buys a chariot, hires 50 men, and he trounces around town with these men running before him in this chariot. What's he trying to look like? He's trying to look like a king. That's not a normal action. That's not normal. Even a prince would not just go around like this. So he's trying to look kingly. He would get up early. He would stand at the entrance of the gate. And what would he do there? He judged. Typically, you see the elders of the city, a lot of times they would gather at the gate. And they would talk, and they would have discussions. But people would pass by the gate on their way to see who? King David, to get judged. Or to rule, to judge on something that they're disputing. Calvin?
I'm not keep talking with stuff. So when all the smoke clears, whenever you go to the Bible and you see the violation of marriage prophecy, these men start having more than one wife, kids raised by different women, all kind of crazy attitudes come out of that situation.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to deal with your children when you got one wife keeping them together. Can you imagine having different children raised by different women and have all different types of attitudes because of the mother?
And God told him not to do it. Yeah.
That's
So
very
he would get up
complicated.
early, he would stand at the entrance of the gate, he'd catch people going in to see David, and he would stop him. He'd say, so what's going on? And he would get them to tell him their situation. And he would always side with them. Oh, you're right. You're 100% right, correct in this matter. If only you had someone to judge you. If only I was in a position to judge you. And then he would kiss their hand, and he would just love on them. And, they're just enamored by his looks. They are. And now he's wooing them, you might say. So he does this for how long?
Oh, man.
This is a patient man, by the way. He's a patient man. How long does he do this little scheme?
Oh.
4 years. 4 years he does this. Because it does take a while to kind of run through the entire nation, doesn't it? As they come to see the king. So, slowly but surely, he's building a reputation of being just an understanding guy. Too bad he's not in charge. I wish someone would appoint me as judge of this nation. I would make sure that everyone would get a fair judgment.
Of course.
Do you really think he cared about the people?
No.
It's like, no. He really didn't care about his father. He didn't care that he wanted to go see David. He didn't care about that anymore.
Oh, boy.
Now he just cared about power. So this was his scheme. People would bend down in front of Absalom and he would kiss them. It was as if Absalom stole the people of Israel away from David. They loved him and they became loyal to him. This is kind of where it gets scary. He's taking power away from the king. After 4 years, Absalom said to the king, please, let me go to Hebron. He makes up this story, another story. What does he tell David?
Make a vow. Keep the vow.
Yeah. I made a vow that if God would let me come back to Jerusalem, that I would go worship in Hebron. Yeah. So David believes him. And why Hebron? We talked about this before. Why did David choose Hebron? Or why did God choose Hebron for David as his first place to go as king? Set up his kingdom. Holy place. It's a holy city. Why is it holy? Who first went there? Abraham. That's where God first had Abraham go. And that's where God showed Abraham the promised land. And that's where Abraham and his relatives are buried. And that's actually also where Absalom was born, in Hebron. Because that's where David first set up his kingdom. So, listen to all that. The Caleb and Pela, yeah, so it's family history there. That's where they're buried. Where David ruled over Judah, and where Absalom was born. So what's his plan now? He's got to consolidate power. What is the first thing he does? He hires men to do what? He sent out spies across the entire nation. And he said, when I tell you, I want you to yell something. What does he want them to yell? Absalom is king. So he's going to set up plants all over the kingdom, and he's just going to have them proclaiming that Absalom is the new king. You know, you hear a lie enough, eventually, you start believing it. So they didn't have the internet. How else would they get their information? So we're hearing all around the cities that Absalom is the new king. So this is his plan. I'm going to send men throughout the nation, just proclaiming that I'm king.
You know, that makes me think David not being present. You know, that Absalom could just have that said, and people would flock to him. If David was present and doing what he should have been doing, people would say, oh, no, David.
Who here thinks David is doing what he should be doing as a king? He's just kind of to me, it just seems like he's in a state of depression.
Yeah.
He wasn't doing what he should have been doing anyways when he did that with Bathsheba, and I think it's gotten worse. I think his mental faculties, he is getting older, I know that, but at the same time, he is not being kingly, he's not being present, he's not in tune with his nation. Apparently, Absalom can sit at the gate for 4 years and David not really notice what's going on. So that's not really good as a king.
Yeah, that's how it happens in the church today. I like making applications to us, you know, and I'm just putting back. It's amazing to me in some of the elderships that I've worked with how they do not know the congregation. They don't know the flock. You know, it's just a shame. And so if they can't lead. It's not a title. It's not just some kind of position in that sense. They're servants. They're leaders. And if people can't follow. They're not giving direction, if you will, but they're not to lord it over, obviously, but it's a big responsibility that elders have over the congregation.
Yeah, that's a called out responsibility. Now, take that on a scale, individual members. How do you guys feel you do in getting to know the flock? Now, if there's someone that you don't really know well, or you don't know their situation, then maybe that's the person you need to go sit down with and have dinner and get to know a little better. So that applies to all of us. If we don't know someone, why? We should just make an effort to get to know each other. How can we pray for one another? How do we know one another's needs if we don't know their situations? So it's just a good idea for all of us to get to know one another better. Don't be a hermit. Don't sit at home all day. Call people, write people. Hey, you want to go get some lunch? You want to come over? A lot of things we can do with one another. And we do, as a general rule, we do a really good job as a congregation of getting together and getting to know one another. Absalom secretly sent men all over the tribes of Israel with this message. When you hear the trumpets, you will say, Absalom is king in Hebron. And then he invites 200 men from Jerusalem. And he invites Ahithophel. Who is Ahithophel? Remember? We talked about him already. Right. When it was talking about Bathsheba, married to Uriah the Hittite. Uriah the Hittite was one of David's 30 mighty men. But it also said Eliam was one of David's 30 mighty men. Who was Eliam? Bathsheba's father. Who was Eliam's father? Ahithophel. And what's Ahithophel's? So Eliam and Uriah are both one of the mighty men. What is Ahithophel's role?
He was counselor?
Counselor. He was counselor to Saul, counselor to David. So you got to figure he's up in age. He's a wise man. And we see that in this story. So Absalom's no dummy. He hires probably the wisest man that he knows, Ahithophel. He invites 200 men from Jerusalem, probably men of renown, men of status. He doesn't tell them what's going on, though. He just invites them to Hebron. And he invites Ahithophel also. So these 200 men were actually innocent. So when David gets word, someone goes to David and says, You've lost your nation. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but they're all following Absalom. So Absalom's plan has worked to a T, it really has. The nation's behind him. Go ahead, Calvin.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot going on here because David, with all that big mess he's made, he gets bigger. He seems like he's on a kind of a certain type of guilt trip. And then when people get a hold of this stuff, and they start getting into guilt, and then they don't know whose side to be on, that is crazy.
Yeah, it'd be hard to be torn between two kingdoms because you don't know who's going to end up on top. Am I going to die if I stay faithful to this guy and the other guy wins?
What about the gossip?
It's a big political mess.
What about the gossip that's going on back and forth?
Yeah. So a man came to David and said, all of Israel is now loyal to Absalom. David's in Jerusalem. What does David do? What is his reaction to this? Flee. It's kind of sad, isn't it? Like you said, he had no clue this was going on, that he was slowly losing his nation. Now Absalom has gained so much power that David has to flee the walled city of Jerusalem.
Man.
It's that bad.
Yes,
He still has his mighty men. He still has his 600 men from Gath. He still has the Kerethites and the Pelethites. He has all these people around him. Do you think he could stay and protect Jerusalem?
Sure.
I think he could. If he decided to, he could fortify that city and be held up. But what would happen? He'd be fighting his son. He'd be fighting other Israelites.
Yeah.
They'd probably siege the city. And what would happen to the people of the city?
Yeah.
They would start to die. So David is thinking about the people of the city. I don't want to bring this upon them. He even says that. So why did David leave Jerusalem? Yeah, for his safety, but he also was for the safety of the people. This is not the first time David has had to flee and wander in the wilderness.
Yeah.
You know, he did that for years and years because Saul was chasing him. He's not new. He's not new to this. He knows how to do it, and he knows how to get away. So it's kind of second nature for him. Put their hand up.
It's very questionable whether he believes this is God's doing or not. I'm getting ahead though, aren't I?
A little bit, but no, it's a good point. I think in a lot of ways he thinks it's God's doing. I think in the back of his mind, because of his guilt,
Right.
he thinks God is punishing him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. So he's forced to leave the city. And everyone goes with him. His family, his officials, all those men I just talked about.
Amazing, it says, but he left his 10 concubines to keep the house.
Yeah. Yeah. Was that a good decision?
No.
I'm going to leave 10 concubines behind too. So it wasn't a wise decision. Why wasn't it? Well, we know why. Okay, we're going to get to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's just God's doing.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Because that's a prophecy.
Yeah.
That's going to be fulfilled.
We may make bad decisions, but that may be what God has intended.
Yeah.
And it's not right for us. And what happens to those?
Yeah.
They're put in a closet. So, later on. And so
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little more, but this is all Scott prophecy because it's fulfilling a prophecy that was made for sure. So he's forced to flee. They head out of the city. The Kerethites, the Pelethites, the 600 men from Gath, they all went with him. And he left behind the 10 concubines to keep the house. And then Ittai comes along. Ittai. Who is this guy? While David's leaving the city, this older gentleman approaches. Who is this guy? He's a foreigner, we know that. He's fairly new to David. But one thing you do know is he's 100% loyal to David. He's got family, he's got men, he's got power, he's got a lot. And David tells this guy, you don't need to be here. You're new, I don't want you involved, I don't want you getting hurt. Just go home, just go back to Jerusalem, you'll be fine. And what is Ittai's response?
Very similar to Ruth.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go where you go.
That's what I was thinking.
I'll die with you.
That's what I was thinking. It was his response, was just like Ruth. He said, I make this promise to the Lord that you are my master and king. I am your servant. I may live or die, but I will go wherever you go. That sounds exactly like Ruth. Yeah. Said to Naomi, I will go wherever you go. So that's why I asked that. Who does this remind you of? David is surrounded by wonderful, loyal, faithful people. And that's because who he is. He's a man after God's own heart, and these people know that, and he appeals to them, they appeal to him, and he also has a lot of loyal people behind him. Of course, now we know that there are a lot of in the nation that aren't, because of the schemes of Absalom. Contrast Ittai with Absalom. One's a foreigner, and one's his son. One's loyal to him, and one betrays him. But remember how Jonathan was loyal to Saul all his days? Even though Saul tried to throw a spear at him one time. Saul tried to kill his best friend on multiple occasions. But guess where Jonathan was when he died? He was with his dad, fighting right alongside his dad. He didn't need to be there. Probably shouldn't have been there. But he was loyal to his father all his days. You just gotta love Jonathan, Jonathan for that. I hope one day I get to meet Jonathan.
Right.
Doesn't get him enough credit.
Right.
He was a wonderful son, wonderful friend, faithful servant of God, and a warrior. So now, here comes Ittai. Now here comes the priests. Here comes the Ark of the Covenant out following David. All these people are loyal to David. Zadok and Abiathar. We've heard these names over and over again. These are the high priests. And they come out with the ark and they're offering sacrifices as all the people leave the city. And as they're leaving the city, what is everyone doing? Everyone's crying.
Yeah.
It's just a sad day
Yeah.
when their king, the greatest warrior they've ever seen in Jerusalem, is having to flee the city of God. It's a sad day, and people are sad. People are crying. And what does David tell the priests? What does he tell them to do with the ark? Take it back. And what does he tell them? Take it back for one day. I hope to come back. I hope that God will allow me to come back and see it again one day.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to earlier there in verse 25. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord. And I think that the next guy that comes on the scene is part of that too.
Yeah.
It cast out in David's mind.
Yeah. So first you had Ittai comes and he's faithful and loyal. Then you had Zadok and Abiathar. They're faithful and loyal. And all the priests. And they have the ark and he sends it back. The Lord is pleased with me, and he will bring me back. He will let me see it again. But in the meantime, if God's pleased with me, he do with me what he wants.
Right.
So he's really just pleading to God. I'm in your hands.
Right.
Do with me what you want. Lead me, guide me, and that should be our attitude every day, isn't it?
Yeah.
But see, we go through life and we want to start making our own path instead of having that attitude of David.
Right.
He doesn't want to sin any of this, but he just wants God to lead him. He knows he's sinned.
Right.
He knows part of this is punishment, but let God just do with me as you want. Tommy?
It almost sounds like, which goes back to the dwelling with the sin of Bathsheba, that David is literally is leading, like, I'm not in favor of God, just take it back. If I found favor, I'll be allowed to come back. Not even trying to alter the path, you just go.
Do you appreciate David's attitude in all this? Yeah. Maybe. It's hard to know. He's not being that warrior king that he used to be, though. And he doesn't want to fight his son, does he? Who is Jonathan and Amahaz? So you have Zadok and Abiathar up here. And you have their two sons, Jonathan and Ahaz. And they're going to help David even. So even they're loyal to David. And we'll get into that in a second here. So David went up the Mount of Olives. Who does that remind you of? Jesus. Going up the Mount of Olives to pray. Jesus was there when he was praying. He was there when the soldiers took him. So as David's leaving, he's going up the Mount of Olives, heading east. He and all the people covered their heads. Their feet were bare as a sign of mourning and despair. And they were all crying as they left. What a sad day for Jerusalem. At the top of the Mount of Olives, another friend of his comes by. So you had all these people coming to him, one at a time. And now this older gentleman comes. His name is Hushai, the Archite. And his coat was torn, and he had dust on his head as a sign of mourning, letting David know that he's mourning with him for what's going on. And what does Hushai want to do? Yeah. David, I'm just like everyone else. I'm here with you. I'm going to go with you. But he's a little older, isn't he? And what do you think his role was in David's cabinet or David's kingdom? He was a counselor. Maybe he was a cohort with Ahithophel. Maybe they knew each other. But he was also an older gentleman who was a counselor to David. And he wants to go with David. What does David tell him?
Same thing you said to me, we'd be a burden.
If Bill comes, well, I'll go with you. No! Maybe it'd be best, he's being very diplomatic. Maybe best if you just stay here. No, but David tells him, he goes, no, you're just going to be a burden to me. You won't be able to keep up. But he's going to use him in a plan, isn't he? He's going to use him. I want you to go back to Absalom, and I want you to tell Absalom that you're faithful and loyal to him. And I want you to be my eyes and my ears. And I want you to use Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. You're going to be with the king every day, and I want you to tell the priests what he's doing. And the priests are old too, so I want the priests to tell their sons to run to me. And you'll know where I'm at. I'm going to be by the Jordan River. So he's using all of these people in his little plan to spy on Absalom.
I think what I'm seeing in this picture is like you said, it's like Jesus whenever he went up to the Mount of Olives, but it also, it's like David is accepting that this is the process that God had unfolded to him before, over the Bathsheba incident, and the fact that he was well aware that all of these things were going to happen because it was foretold to him. And so he's bearing the burden of his own decisions on his shoulders as he's going. And, he's not going to turn away these people that are following him because he knows God's providence. He knows that in the end, God always wins. And if he's with God, he's going to win. But it also talks about in verse 31 that David is talking to God still. So even though he's kind of been hiding behind, it seems like he's hiding behind the scenes, maybe he's just, in mourning, and he is keeping his humility about him because he knows that this is a process that God has already kind of like let him in on.
Okay. Yeah. Good point. Hushai the Archite was one of David's most faithful and wise counselors. In Chronicles, he's described as the king's friend. But David loves us. And the most important thing with David right now is he really doesn't want to see anyone get hurt. He doesn't want to see people in Jerusalem get hurt. He doesn't want his friends to get hurt. So he wanted to go with David. David said, go back and be a spy for me. You will be a servant, just like he was to his father. David asked him to foil the advice of Ahithophel. Why would he have to ask that? This tells me that David was slightly afraid of Ahithophel's advice, or at least respected his advice. He will report to Abiathar and Zadok, and then their sons will report to David. So now the Ziba shows up. You remember Ziba? Saul's servant, who is now his
Mephibosheth's servant, right? You remember him? So he shows up with the donkeys. Ziba met David with a team of donkeys loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a jug of wine. And David says, Ziba, what are you doing here? I didn't expect to see you. And what am I supposed to do with all these donkeys? What are you doing with all these donkeys and all this food? And he says, well, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride. Well, that's nice. The bread and fruit are for the young men to eat, and the wine is for whoever is weary. So that was real nice of Ziba to show up, wasn't it? Refresh David, encourage him. You think Ziba's on David's side? No? Well, that's not what he says. The king says, oh, sorry about that. The king says, where is your master's son? You're here. Where is Mephibosheth?
Jerusalem.
He's in Jerusalem. Ziba said that he stayed in Jerusalem. He's hoping to become the next king. He heard what's going on. He knows you're on the outs. He's actually hoping that because he's of the lineage of Saul, that he's going to be able to rise up again. He'll be king. So this doesn't make David happy, does it? So David has a knee-jerk reaction. What does he do? He tells Ziba, remember all that property? Go ahead. Yeah. Remember that he gave Mephibosheth all of Saul's land, and Ziba now was supposed to, him and his servants and his sons were supposed to make the land, they were to serve Mephibosheth.
Right.
I don't think Ziba was all happy with that, do you? He just continued to remain a servant. So he shows up and he blames Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth wants to be king, and so David gives Ziba all of his material possessions. Just on the spot. Okay, everything that was Mephibosheth's is now yours. So David believed him. He gave him all Saul's land as a reward. Was Ziba telling the truth?
No.
We're going to talk about it more later. If you go to 2 Samuel 19, he asked Mephibosheth, why weren't you there with me? He goes, well, Ziba betrayed me. It's Ziba's fault. Ziba wanted power. So you got two ends of the spectrum here, both blaming each other. So what does David eventually do? He's not handle this. What was Solomon do? Split in half? Yeah. Let's split the baby. So he says, okay, you both get half. We solved that problem. He didn't know who to believe. But yeah, I don't think Ziba's being honest here, to tell you the truth. So now we got this guy shows up. All these people keep showing up. This guy is also a relative of Saul.
Yeah.
A man from Saul's family named Shammai came out, and he was hurling insults at David. Not only was he hurling insults, he was hurling stones. He was throwing dirt. Just picture a madman up on there, just ranting and raving, throwing stones, throwing dirt, just ranting and raving. It probably wasn't that far away, because that means the stones were getting to him, because David's men had to protect him. So they were protecting David. Now, who is this guy? That's David's nephew. You remember Joab is David's nephew. Asahel was David's nephew, the one that could run like a gazelle, the one that got killed by Abner. And what was the third nephew? Abishai. So Abishai was one of David's right-hand men, just like Joab, just like Asahel. Well, Abishai was there when David met Saul, when David went into the camp. God had caused them all to go into a deep sleep, and Saul was right there. Abishai was the one with him, and Abishai wanted to do what?
Kill king.
David, just let me do it. You won't even get up. David said, no, we're not going to do that. I'm not going to kill Saul. But that was Abishai, always ready with his knife. Abishai said, let me go kill him. I'll cut off his head right here. And what was David's response? No. And kind of like we said before, David thinks that this is all God's doing. God probably sent him. Let him go on his own. And sure enough, they do, and
this guy follows him all the way to Jordan. They're hurling insults at him the entire time.
Yeah.
Calling him a murderer.
Yeah.
Say you murdered Saul's family, which he did not. David's the one that protected Saul's family. Protected Mephibosheth. David didn't kill Saul or Jonathan. The Philistines did. David's just protected him. So he's just lying about David, and Abishai is completely upset at him. But David, being David, just leave him alone. He goes, he's from Benjamin. He has more right to be mad at me than my own son. Just let him go. Probably God's doing anyway. Yeah. Abishai called him a dead dog. Put his cut off his head. David said, leave him alone. Perhaps the Lord will see that I am sad and give me some good news.
All right.
David is kind of despondent.
Yeah.
Depressed. Just let God do what he's going to do. Yeah. Maybe he'll bless me again. Yeah. Because he knows a lot of this is his own doing. Yeah. From his sin to Bathsheba. So, Hushai made it to Jerusalem. He convinced Absalom he was on his side. Hushai was his wise counselor, his old friend again. And then Absalom asked Ahithophel, what advice do you give me? Yeah. And first thing Ahithophel thinks of is you need to go into these 10 concubines. And you need to make it public. Because what will that do? That will solidify his kingdom. That will show the people who the new king is. It will also kind of put more of a wedge between David and Absalom. Yep. And this is exactly what Absalom does. And it does work. And this fulfills that prophecy that Nathan told David, that one day, one of your own relatives will take your concubines and it will be a public thing. And so Ahithophel is wise. Yeah. He knew exactly what to do. Yeah. In those days, people thought Ahithophel was very wise. In fact, his advice seemed like the wisdom that a person receives from God. Mm-hmm. Absalom had trusted Ahithophel's advice just as David had done. This is why David was scared of Ahithophel. Yeah. And why he wanted Hushai there to be kind of that counter to Ahithophel. We're going to see that come to play later on. Thank you, everyone. Bye.